Hi, I'm George Pullar and I play Bernie Hunter Jr., commonly referred to as Hunter or Newbie, short for Newport. So I've got quite a few names in the show. I was first sent the scripts for Barons, would have been 2 years ago, well before COVID, and they asked me to tape for Trotter. So I did that. I really loved the scripts to begin with, and then I didn't really hear anything about it for over a year, and it was only when I was back in Australia sometime last year when, sometime this year when they asked me to retape for Hunter. And really it was from the outset of knowing what it was about and being familiar with that world myself, and also knowing that Taylor Steele was on board, I just desperately wanted to be a part of it from the outset. Yeah, well, for me, I think the first thing that struck me was that I was familiar with the story that it was based on, and I knew that that as a story in itself was epic, and I thought this is going to make a really great series and is a really fascinating story filled with really great larger-than-life kind of characters. And then coupled with Taylor Steele's involvement, it just brought so much credibility to the surfing element of the show. It was just a no-brainer. It just sounded like a dream job. It was a great world, great characters, a really strong setting, and a story that I've grown up hearing all about. So for me, it just felt like one that I really didn't want to miss out on. Barons is ultimately about the beginnings of the commercialisation of surfing. And at its core, it follows the rivalry between what is to become the surf mecca brands of the world. It's a global story, and it's set against the backdrop of the 70s. So in that we see some really gripping elements of, people fighting for new freedoms, rebellion, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all of that kind of stuff. But at its core, it's about a bunch of surfers who are desperate to begin profiting off this world that they know so well. And in that, there's a wonderful rivalry and just a lot of twists and turns in the way of romance, power, greed. It really is a story for everyone, and I would argue that it's an iconic Australian story. I just think also, above all of that, it's just a whole lot of fun. Hunter is a rich kid from Newport Beach, California. He comes to this world in Australia, this surf world, as a total outsider. He comes from a conservative family, he's wealthy, he's well educated, and to begin with, he's, as I said, very much an outsider. He's in some ways ridiculed, he's laughed at, he's very much a sideline player, and he's desperate to get in on the inside. And so to begin with, we find Hunter very often the quietest person in the room among a much louder, larger-than-life bunch of characters around him. But that really gives him an opportunity to observe and to figure out how he can carve his way into this world. And they say that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous, and that's always the way that I felt about Hunter. And knowing where he ends up going and travelling as a character, we were really careful at the beginning of the series to just clock him observing and trying to understand this foreign world to him. He's not a particularly good surfer. He's not particularly good with the ladies. He, for lack of a better description, he's a bit of a nerd to all these guys. But what he does have is a deep ambition and intelligence, and he is very resourceful. And so he knows he has things that a lot of these guys don't. But to begin with, he's just a guy that's desperate to fit in. I think at the core of all of Hunter's decisions, whether he's aware of it or not, is a desire to be liked, a desire to be accepted. Ironically, he kind of slips between two worlds, because he doesn't quite fit in with this cool rat pack bunch of rebellious, working class, rough, tough surfers, and yet he certainly doesn't feel like he fits in with the superficial, conservative world of rich America. And so he really feels like he gets lost between the gaps. And he's ultimately desperate to prove himself. His solution to feeling like he doesn't really have an identity is to build something or to create something of himself where he can't be ignored. And I think while his intentions begin innocent and earnest, what's interesting is that we watch them become more destructive, and how he is in some ways cursed by his own ambition. I think what I love most about the show, and from the outset of reading it, was how it speaks to ambition in young people, and particularly young men, and how, you know, it poses at the core of this story is an interesting question, which is, what are you willing to sacrifice to achieve what you want? And that to me is a really interesting question. You know, I'm in my 20s, and rarely are you doing a show where there's so much of the cast in that age group, and something certainly at the forefront of your mind in your 20s is, who am I and where do I fit into this world? And that is very much at the center of this story, is people trying to create identities through success and through their own ambition, and how that along the way can corrode your own moral compass and, you know, the lighter, more innocent sides of who you are. And I can relate to that. I can relate to understanding the feeling, the need to prove yourself, the need to make something of yourself. And I think that's what's timeless about this story, is how if we are all eventually corrupted by our own ambition, or if we're able to succeed and not destroy a part of ourselves, a part of our personal selves along the way. I don't have the answer to that question. I don't think the show does either, but it certainly explores it. Hunter's relationship with Buddy certainly evolves throughout the series, but to begin with they're just best friends, and they have a really beautiful friendship because they come from opposite ends of the spectrum. Hunter is rich, educated, conservative. Buddy is poor, a wild child, charismatic, the largest personality in the room, and they counterbalance off each other. They look after each other, and it's an incredibly genuine, thriving friendship to begin with. They fill in each other's blanks, but throughout the series, we witness their relationship go from a personal one to a professional one. And I think the question that we begin to ask of our audience and of ourselves is, can a personal and a business relationship coexist? You know, and it's a difficult thing for both Buddy and Hunter to hold on to that genuine side of their friendship in the face of, you know, looming success and money and everything else that comes with it. And so their relationship really evolves from one that's personal to professional, and sort of jumps between the two. But yeah, to begin with, it really is just two buddies looking after each other. I think what's most impressive watching Lincoln on all of this is that he's nothing like Buddy, and people watching the show probably won't know that because he's so convincing in that role, but he's the most humble, professional, and to be honest, probably one of the quietest guys on set. He's a very, he puts other people first all the time, and I've noticed that in working with him. He's incredibly generous, but yet he plays a character that is wild and attention-stealing and colourful and just so large. And I think that me and Lincoln have got a great sort of deal of respect for each other as actors and as friends, but also we've pushed each other along the way. He's just so terrific in the show that I've personally felt the need to just raise the bar every time he does. And I think we've worked off each other well in a sort of healthy, competitive way, and it would be a waste not to use that when you're working with an actor of that caliber. And yeah, he's been a treat. He's so easy to work with. Hunter, what to me is most intriguing about Hunter is that he's wealthy, he's privileged, He comes from a background of money and education and all the things that people want. And yet when he slides into this surfing world in the 70s, it actually works as a disadvantage to him. It's one of the few worlds where having money puts you at a disadvantage. You know, this is a story set at the core of, you know, tall poppy, working class Australia, and no world embraces that more than the surfing world, particularly in the 70s. So he comes into this world almost at a disadvantage. They laugh at him, they ridicule him, they look at his clothes and the way he speaks and his sense of tradition, and it's funny to them. And so what to me is interesting is how he begins to sort of change who he is in order to be accepted. And I think that's pretty universal. That's something that a lot of people can relate to, whether they can relate it in themselves or have seen it in other people. That's intriguing. And I think also what is intriguing is that he's wounded. He feels disrespected, and out of that is born a great ambition. And I think that's what ultimately makes him dangerous, is that he's determined to create something of himself where he can no longer be ignored. And what's great as an actor is getting to, usually you're playing a character that's becoming, you know, morally more evolved, whereas in Hunter's case, there's moral corrosion here. There is a sense of him, you know, to steal the title of a great show, Breaking Bad, like he's becoming a worse human being in order to achieve what he wants, in order to be liked. And it's just a fascinating sort of tale of the you know, the trap of human behaviour. I think this cast is just, there's so much young talent on it, and me personally, I've just been aware of that the whole way through. And so I think that there's been a real awareness of the opportunity and a sense of gratitude really for getting to work around some of Australia's best young actors and actresses, and personally, you know, in line with the character, a sense of wanting to prove myself to them and to audiences that will be watching, knowing that everyone around me will be really good in this. And I suppose I just want to, you know, sail with the ship that's floating high. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I suppose I just want to meet the bar that's been set by everyone, and you know, everyone's also just had such a fun time on this, and there's a real infectious energy to it all, which helps to bring a sense of, you know, playfulness in the performance and a looseness, which is always useful. My connection to the material as a surfer is, to begin with, troubling, because the first thing I think about is how naff surfing is often portrayed in film and TV, and there's two sides to that coin, because it makes me desperately want to be a part of it, but it also makes me terrified of it not looking real or authentic. And I've had that totally squashed through my experience in making this. I care so deeply about the surfing elements of this show looking real, and that surfers can sit there and watch it, particularly older surfers, and go, yeah, that was it. Or, you know, they've done a really good job of recreating that. And surfing to me is such a big element of the show. I can't wait to see all the surfing scenes. And it's not just the actual surfing, but it's everything from how actors carry their surfboards and you know, how people wax their board up and put their fin in and walk to the beach, and all the stuff around the surfing as well. We've worked really hard for it to be authentic. But I really think that it's one of the strongest elements of the show is how well we pull it off. And as a surfer myself, I've just so enjoyed watching these scenes be recreated and allowing myself to transport back in time and live out what it was like to be a surfer in the 70s. You know, I'm a surfer today, but it was a different thing in the 70s, and I've dreamed of being a surfer back then, and I idolised so many surfers from that era, and to go back in time and to feel a part of that is a magical experience. I think the biggest thing I've learned about the 70s is that, not that I didn't already suspect this, but it just would have been so much fun to be in and to live through, especially as a guy in your young 20s. I think on a personal level, something that I've really enjoyed is, in a lot of ways, I think people would say that men have evolved in some senses from them, but I think we've lost a lot of great things in masculinity that existed back then. And I've loved revisiting the sense of, chivalry and gentlemanliness in men, particularly, Hunter. He comes from a traditional wealthy family, and just the costumes and the greetings and the setting, it really brings a sense of tradition back, and it's just been great to revisit that. It's not something you see a lot in modern society, and it's something that I've grown up watching a lot on film and TV and reading about in books, but to get the chance as an actor to dive into that and to try and make it feel real, it makes me think about my grandparents and my parents and how they would have acted back in the day. And there's a few elements to it that I want to hold on to, because there's a charm to the way people were back in the 70s without mobile phones. There's a level of straightforwardness with people, because that's all they knew, and I miss that, and I hope to hold on to a little bit of it. I think costume is one of the most useful things as an actor. It immediately changes the way that I sit, I stand and I talk when I put on a costume, and we have incredible costumes on this show. And I also think it's one of the most enjoyable parts for the audience, getting to indulge in the aesthetic of the 70s. And typically period pieces can go two ways, that they can be quite striking and magnificent and transportive, or they can look quite naff and tacky. And I really think we've hit that element so strongly on this show. And as an actor, it's just a joy to get to be gifted with all these toys to play with, and it just sparks your imagination. You're in scenes holding things and wearing things, you're going, wow, like this is not, sure it's character, but this is a real person. Someone wore this, someone said this, someone did this, and it's a great moment to reflect on. Yeah, as I said, people in my family and older friends that I have would have operated in this world, and one of the greatest gifts you can be given as an actor is props and costumes. I'm a sucker for it. I absolutely love props and costumes. They just get my imagination excited. I didn't have a 70s playlist per se, but I had a lot of surf footage that I watched. Surf movies, archive stuff on YouTube, just to sort of get me pumped. In fact, last week before I did my surf unit filming, I spent like 2 or 3 hours over dinner just on YouTube, just watching Jerry Lopez at Pipeline surf some of the most ridiculous surfing I've ever seen, pumping myself up to go surfing. And it has been funny that the surf stuff, how even I've had to try and adjust my performance as a surfer to try and meet the style of the 70s, and that to me has been one of the most special elements of the show, is trying to mimic how these guys would surf, especially on different boards back in the day. So not a music playlist, but a surf playlist for sure. I think working with all of them, they've each brought something different and unique and special, but overall the thing that sort of binds them all together is that it's just been a lot of fun. They're very playful, not overly prescriptive, and there's a real sense of looseness to it. And I'm not sure if that's mirroring the era, but I think maybe it's got something to do with the sets and the costumes, but everyone has just felt fun and loose and playful in this, and I think that was a really important tone to set at a directing level as well for the actors. Sean's just terrific. He's a total actor's director, and he really is receptive to the actor's ideas. You just feel so appreciated and heard. Fadia has such a strong vision. Every time you're arriving at every scene, you know that she's thought about everything, that her level of attention to detail is magnificent, and I think it'll show in her block. And Taylor Steele, for me, is surf royalty. I mean, for everyone really, but as a surfer, he's the Martin Scorsese of the surf world, and his involvement in this show gives it so much pedigree in terms of its surf authenticity. I truly don't think it's a stretch to say that he's one of the best surf filmmakers of all time, and in fact I think a lot of people in the know would agree with that, and his involvement in this show is a privilege to all of us. I'd say Barons is iconic, sexy, and a whole lot of fun. I'm going to try one more. I'd describe Barons just like I'd describe a really good single fin surfboard from the 70s. It's smooth, it's fast, and it cuts out all the crap. For me, I think the thing that'll surprise people the most is how impressive the surf stuff is. I've seen some of the surfing stuff cut together, and as a surfer, I was just in awe. I just think it is such a strength of the show, and the surf doubles that we have are literally the best, some of the best surfers in the world. The beaches that we've got in Australia, I mean, we're so lucky. We got pumping waves through the chute. The surf DOP, Chris, is incredible. All the jet ski drivers, the fact that Sean surfs, I surf, you know, as I said, there's so rarely do you see the sport in sports stuff, the sport portrayed so well, and I think it's such a strength of the show. And even for people that don't surf, it's just a wonderful visual feast to watch great surfers surfing and expressing themselves on a wave, and I can't wait to see it, and that's what I'm most excited about. I just hope they have a really fun time watching it. I hope they love the characters, and I hope they laugh and smile, and you know, if you're younger, I hope they think back to their parents and uncles and aunties and grandparents and think about how they would have been in this era, because that's all I've been doing through all of this, is thinking of older family and wondering what they did. And I think that it's a really fun reflection to have. But ultimately, I don't think it's an overly thinky kind of series. I hope they don't overanalyze it. I hope they just are teleported into a fun, sexy, glamorous world where they can just really enjoy themselves. This is my little pitch for the 80s. I hope we see Hunter really become corrupted by his own sense of greed. I hope I get the strongest arc that I can possibly get and really turn this guy into his own worst enemy. I'm fascinated in self-destruction, and there's no better era to play a character who's self-destructive and indulgent and greedy than the 80s. I hope it's bigger boats, bigger waves, bigger costumes, everything just bigger and brighter, and all sort of leading to an inevitable crash. I love that. I love watching a car crash in slow motion for a character. That's great.